Welcome to the IND podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Dunicic. Like, comment, subscribe. The Winter Olympic Games for 2022 have opened in Beijing, China, marking Beijing as the only city in Olympic history to host both the Winter and Summer Olympic Games. Now, our podcast today is not going to focus so much on the athletics or the sport aspect of the Olympics, but what the Olympics are actually intended as today, which is a major diplomatic event that serves to both strengthen and build ties between private government actors, between the nations themselves, and public diplomacy, increasing the mentality or the outlook or the perception of different nations in the eyes of other people, creating a more connected, diverse, and open globalistic world. That is the purpose of the Olympic Games, basically creating international cooperation on all levels. Now, what our main story is actually going to focus on today is the opening of the Olympic Games. But the China in 2022 that's opening up the Games this year, and the China in 2008 that opened up the Summer Olympics 14 years ago. These are two very, very different Chinas. Now, the Olympic Games opening ceremony for the Summer Olympics in 2008, hosted by Beijing China, is considered to be the most extravagant, the most masterful, one of the most beautiful, well choreographed, and wonderful opening ceremonies in Olympic history. And I personally remember being a fucking kid and watching that. It was spectacular. It was amazing. There were thousands of performers, extremely well choreographed. No one was off, even by a pinch of a hair. The pyrotechnics were incredible. The fireworks, everything was just on another level. And while the opening ceremony of the 2022 Olympics this year for the Winter Olympics was also impressive, these Olympics come with a lot more baggage behind the scenes. Now, the 2008 Summer Olympics for China were extremely important. 2008 marked a moment in China's history where the nation was a growing economic power, and the Olympic Games were the nation's opportunity to finally present itself to the global arena, and it did so successfully. China, as a growing economic power, showed an open country ready to interact with a wonderful culture and ready to be a part of the global sphere and the complete international community. Now, the China that is hosting the Olympic Games today is no longer a growing economic power. It is an economic power. And not just an economic one, but a political one, a military one, a diplomatic one. China is a superpower that is equal to its influence, almost to the hegemonic influence that the United States has. The world is slowly going through to a bipolar direction in the geopolitical system. And this time, it is not split between the United States and the USSR. It is going to be split between the United States and China. Now, obviously, we have not led into any major conflicts that have not been proxy wars, etc., like the Cold War was with Russia. But China is beginning to make a global presence. And unlike the China in 2008 that hosted the Summer Olympic Games, China is not willing to make any concessions or be completely appetizing to actors that it doesn't fully agree with. China is assertive, China is dominant, and China is going to be the master of its own course. That has actually been a little troubling for the international community because China fundamentally has some problems that domestically affect the international community and also just fundamentally have been violations of civil rights and human rights. Now, first and foremost, the biggest issue in terms of China has been Hong Kong. Now, China has, over the past 2 years, even more, taken extensive action to completely quash and take away any democratic activism or any semblance of democracy in what is supposed to be a completely autonomous zone free of Chinese rule. Another major problem that is continuing to develop is China's stance towards Taiwan. Now, I'm going to be intentionally ambiguous as much as I can with my wordage here. Taiwan, officially the Republic of China, as Taiwan claims, is an island democracy that has diplomatic relations with pretty much every major country in the world. It has a very large and productive economy. Taiwan essentially operates like an independent country. And depending on who you ask, it is one. But if you ask the Chinese, it is not one. I'm not going to give my stance on this issue just yet. I don't want to have my YouTube channel canceled. A lot of people have gotten in trouble for stating that Taiwan is a country. Not saying that that's what I believe, but it is something that people have to be precarious about. That's how aggressive China is towards Taiwan. China has taken a much more militarily aggressive approach, a much more diplomatically oppressive approach, and just a generally more aggressive approach towards Taiwan, making many people believe that China is going to make a move to absorb the territory of Taiwan into its territory soon. Now, when we do cover Taiwan specifically in a story, I will go through the historical complexities, through the Chinese Civil War, through Chiang Kai-shek, who ran the KMT, and the Kuomintang, who was kicked out by the CCP at the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949 and had to flee, go into exile on the island of Taiwan, eradicate the indigenous people, and establish a fascist government, which eventually developed into the modern-day democracy that Taiwan is today, and establish what is going on between the two countries. But today, we do not have the time for that. But that has created another issue, the Taiwan question, for many Western countries. Another massive problem for China has been Uyghur Muslims, or their Uyghur Chinese ethnic group. Now, Uyghur, many people think is pronounced Uyghur because it's actually spelled like that. But the Uyghur people are a Central Asian Muslim ethnic group. They are Turkic in origin. Now, the Uyghur primarily live in the western Xinjiang autonomous region of China. Now, the Chinese have historically had a significant difficulty completely integrating Uyghurs into the Chinese state. Uyghurs tend to be a lot more autonomous because of their Muslim identity. In addition to this, because of China's communist atheist views on religion, this has caused other problems socially. And China has been accused of committing genocide on Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. More specifically, a large amount of internment camps were found to exist by the international community. It is believed that in these internment camps, Uyghur Muslims were being ethnically cleansed or killed. Now, the Chinese government has stated that, look, these internment camps, they exist, but they're not like concentration camps. We're not killing the Uyghurs. They're going, it's a nice place. It's a vocational school. They're having a nice education. They're being able to learn how to integrate into Chinese society. And I just want to point out that that is not the first time a world government has been caught creating camps for ethnic groups and said, oh yes, this is a wonderful, lovely place for the ethnic minorities. They're having so much fun here. A good example is the accent that I just did. Adolf Hitler and the German government, when they created internment camps for the Jewish population, did not acknowledge that they were a terrible death camp. They made them seem like they were a pleasant, wonderful place where Jews were learning skills to integrate into society and having a wonderful place to live separately away from other non-Semitic people. In addition to this, the United States, we have to give credit where credit is due. The United States made the same argument for the Japanese that it placed in internment camps during World War II. So this is a classic argument made by governments that create camps for ethnic groups, saying they are a positive, nice place. And history has shown us that these camps, no ethnic camp is a nice, positive place. The only thing that occurs in these camps is, at best, light forms of ethnic cleansing, educating people to not identify as their ethnic group, or in the worst case, outright genocide, mass murder, rape, pretty much anything that can be done to abolish that group of people. Now, it is estimated that in the 30 years that have passed since the Tiananmen Square massacre, now I want to point out that the Tiananmen Square massacre is completely unrelated to the Uyghur Muslims, but I just want to talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre. The Tiananmen Square massacre was a Chinese government response to democratic protests carried out primarily by young people and students within various different squares of China, Tiananmen being the largest one. Responding to completely peaceful democratic protests, the government decided to send in tanks and soldiers to kill, depending on who you ask, between hundreds to thousands of Chinese protesters, who again were nonviolent and not harming anyone. Now, it is estimated that in the 30 years that have passed in the completely unrelated Tiananmen Square massacre, that the Chinese government has killed around 1 million Uyghur Muslims in these internment camps. Now, it's hard to get to these numbers and to develop a concrete estimate of what exactly is going on. The Chinese are not Nazi Germany. They do not keep extensive records of what they're doing in these camps. In addition to that, we're not at war with China. No one's going in there. No one's taking control of these camps. No one can see what's actually happening besides the accounts of Uyghur Muslims who were previously interned at these camps. That is how we're primarily getting these information, and the estimates are extremely rough. They could be 0 people have died in those internment camps. It could be much, much more people have died in those internment camps. But the general estimate is around 1 million people, and that is the Western estimate. The government of China will significantly disagree with you. Now, finally, to a much smaller extent, another issue that kind of seemed to be the straw to break the camel's back for many countries for these Olympic Games being hosted by China was the public life disappearance of tennis star Peng Shuai. Now, Peng Shuai is a Chinese tennis celebrity, massively successful athlete who decided to accuse a top-ranking Communist Party official of committing sexual assault against her. Now, ever since she made this comment, she has completely disappeared from public life. All of her statements on the Chinese internet have been completely removed, and any kind of discourse or discussion that is being had regarding her comments is extremely censored by the CCP, especially on the Chinese internet. Now, all of these actions, and just to reverberate and kind of bring everything together, China's behavior towards Hong Kong, its behavior towards Taiwan, and its behavior towards Uyghur Muslims, and its generally autocratic regime that it has established in the last 14 years has caused many nations to diplomatically boycott these Olympic Games. Now, just to understand exactly what's going on, countries can boycott Olympic Games. Now, there's typically 2 types of boycotts. One is a diplomatic boycott. That's actually the light version of a Olympic boycott. What a diplomatic boycott is where a nation's athletes are still allowed to participate and play and compete in the games, but that its leadership, the nation's political leadership, its presidents, prime minister, ministers of foreign affairs, secretaries of state, etc., will not be attending these games. There will be no official presence of the government of that country to those games. A full boycott is where there is no attendance of the government officials and there's no attendance or competition of the athletes. No one from that country is going to attend those games, period. No one. There has been no hard boycott against these games in 2022, but there have been diplomatic boycotts. These opening games that occurred in China today on Friday actually were marked by a significant lack of world leaders. The most prominent world leader there was Vladimir Putin. And the reason that Vladimir Putin was attending is because China is extremely crucial to Russia to have as an ally during the crisis that it is facing with the US and its NATO allies and Ukraine. But besides Vladimir Putin, no other extremely powerful or relevant world leaders were there. Notably because the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and many more have decided to diplomatically boycott these games. Their leadership, their politicians, their diplomats will not be attending what is occurring during these Winter Games. They will not make any form of diplomatic appearances, which has already marked a very bad beginning for these 2022 Winter Games. And these games are actually important to Xi Jinping. Now, the reality is these Olympic Games are not nearly as important to China, politically speaking, as the ones in 2008. China has already established itself on the global level as a major power that can, just through soft power, without having to invade any country, without having to get militarily involved, can through its investment of infrastructure, can through its promotion of culture, can through just its simple interactions become a major global power. China has established itself. It doesn't have to prove itself to anyone anymore. But the reality is this is an important moment for Xi Jinping because the 2008 Summer Games were coordinated and directed by the Chinese head of the Olympic Committee, who in 2008 was Xi Jinping. Today, Xi Jinping is no longer the head of the diplomatic committee. He is China's chairman of everything. He is the most powerful man in China since Mao Zedong. The de facto head of state head of government, head of everything in China, Xi Jinping has a massive amount of power in what happens in his nation, almost at virtually every single level. Because China, again, is a country that is significantly lacking in democracy. But I don't mean to say this to criticize it. There are a lot of countries in the world that are not democratic, that are autocratic, that actually have functioning economies, the people live good lives, and the people actually have a very positive approval rating of their leaders. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, Singapore, the list goes on and on and on and on. Now, China was actually like this. And Xi Jinping, who has been leading China for quite some time now, was like this too. But in recent years, the leadership of China, Jinping specifically, have begun to take even more aggressive approaches and consolidate their power even further, passing laws that are kind of fucking ridiculous when you look at it. And this has caused many people to question Jinping and his intentions for the government and the country of China. Now, obviously, I personally believe that Xi Jinping, like every other world leader, has the best intentions for his people. But these actions that are being undertaken by him and his government may not be the best course for China. Now, finally, besides the rocky diplomatic start that these Olympic Games have been faced with, there has been another problem, and that problem is coronavirus, which is not that big of a deal because the coronavirus was also a problem during the recent Summer Olympic Games that occurred in Tokyo last year. Now, the only difference is China, out of any country in the world, probably has the strictest approach to coronavirus. When one case of a virus is detected in any Chinese city or Chinese block or Chinese area, that area is completely locked down. And there are extensive quarantine periods. We're not talking 5 to 10 to 15 days. We're talking even longer, taken by the Chinese government. Athletes who have just arrived at the games for the opening ceremonies were greeted by flight attendants, hotel staff, and security guards wearing goddamn hazmat suits like they were in the middle of the movie Contagion. In addition to this, every single athlete at the games has to be tested for COVID-19 on a daily basis. Every single day they have to be tested for COVID-19. Finally, this is probably the worst part. The Olympic Village, where the athletes are living in and just going about their daily life when they're not competing, is completely shut off from Beijing. The athletes cannot go party, enjoy themselves, or even go see the city of Beijing. They are completely locked off, like they're in some kind of gigantic prison filled with beautiful Adonises and Aphrodites of peak, wonderful physical perfection. But it's a prison. Nonetheless, they cannot leave and actually see Beijing, which has been disturbing for a lot of these athletes, obviously. Now, if an athlete is to test positive for COVID-19, they will be faced with an extensive quarantine. And this has caused a lot of nations to criticize China. Look, I understand. The coronavirus is deadly. It can cause unnecessary death, and strict measures need to be taken. But look, China objectively, this is not an opinion, just objectively is taking things too far, especially when hosting athletes and guests. These are guests from other countries who are not used to such a strict approach to coronavirus or pretty much any matter of their lives for that matter. Now, we're going to continue following the Olympic Games because I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of interesting political developments. The Olympic Games are not just an athletic moment. They are one that is filled with political ones where history can be made. And in a sense, history has already been made. Responding to the criticisms that I just mentioned for its treatment of Uyghur Muslims, the Chinese government has had the final pallbearer of the Olympic flame be a Uyghur Muslim. So look, some good things are happening and some other major political developments are sure to happen in China of 2022. But these games are going to be interesting to watch. And I'm constantly going to compare them to the China Games of the Summer Olympics in 2008 because the image that China was presenting and the country that China was then is fundamentally, radically different than the China it is now. Significantly more powerful, significantly more dominant, significantly more assertive, and significantly more dictatorial. But also, China doesn't have to worry about other countries. It's going to be interesting to see the kind of image that China promotes during these games. Let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Like, dislike this video, share this video, subscribe to our channel, join our growing international community. It's been a pleasure being with you guys this week. I'll see you next week.